We are now on cycle 3. So cycle 3 covers pages 168 through 174. So I'd like you to pause this video and open up to page 168. Resume it when you are there. Go. Page 168. Okay, she said, I'll have the same. Mr. Jimmy ordered a supper that was all the way different from mine, and Steady Eddie ordered one that was all the way different from his. No wonder you hear about rich folks going to restaurants once a week. This was great. Miss Tyler went away, and Miss Thomas started back on me. But I've got to let you know that I'm pretty sure that there's just no way that Mr. C is your father. Tell me what tell me what gave you the idea he was. My mother did, ma'am. Miss Thomas looked over at Mr. Jimmy real quick, then said, Sweetheart, did you know a whole lot of people all over the state know Mr. C? Did you know he's pretty famous? No, ma'am. Ah, well, you know what I think? I think maybe your mother heard him on the radio, or heard somebody talking about him, or saw the band somewhere, and told you that Mr. C reminded her of your father, and you misunderstood what she meant. Isn't that possible? I don't think so, ma'am. She looked at me for a second, then said, Did she come right out and say, Your daddy is Hermione Calloway, Bud? Well, almost. But not in words just like that. Then tell me what the words were like, honey. Uh-oh. It was going to be hard to explain to Miss Thomas about mighty maples and hints from flyers. As long as I kept Hermione Calloway being my father to myself, the whole thing made real good sense. But as soon as I tried to tell other folks about it, it seemed like maybe it was something some stupid kid had dreamed up, like it was wishing and hoping instead of something true and real. I looked down at my suitcase and said, Well, and I could tell my luck was changing. Before I could say anything else, Miss Tyler was at our table with a tray. Miss Thomas reached across the table, patted my hand, and said, We'll talk tomorrow, Bud. I bet you're sick and tired of answering people's questions, aren't you? I said, Yes, ma'am, I am. But I did notice that she said tomorrow. That might mean they weren't going to try to send me back to Flint right away. Miss Tyler said, Miss Thomas, and set a plate in front of her, then said, Mr. Jimmy, and gave him some food too, then said, Steady, and put his plate down so that it rattled a little, then said, and finally the young gentleman, and put a plate crammed with food in front of me. It was the best meal I'd ever had, and when it was done, Miss Tyler brought me a dessert she called "on the house." It was a piece of warm sweet potato pie with some white fluffy stuff called whipped cream swapped all over the top of it. I want to pause right here. This is an example of dramatic irony. Dramatic irony is where the reader knows more than the characters. We know that "on the house" means that it's free, like the restaurant is covering the dessert. But Bud, because he's never had this before, thinks that that is the name of the meal. So we know more than Bud. So it is dramatic irony. We are going to continue. After I shoved the last crumbs of pie in my mouth and scraped up the little last dribbles of whipped cream, I looked around at the people at my table, and I couldn't help breaking out in a big smile. I didn't see it before, but now that I looked, I could tell that Miss Thomas must be the most beautiful woman in the world. When she talked, she moved her hands and fingers around, and the lights from the ceiling and from the little candle on the table would bounce off all them diamonds and sparkle up in your eye and make you feel like you'd been hit with some kind of magic fairy dust. Then you couldn't help but smile. All the while she'd hum too, just hum. Doesn't seem, but sorry, but hum doesn't seem like the right word for what she was doing. Most times I'd heard humming before it was just an excuse for not being able to sing, or something people do if they didn't know the words to a song. Uh-uh. That doesn't fit the sounds Thomas was making. You couldn't help but look up and wonder if this was a real human being that was making these sounds. What her humming reminded me most of was that feeling you get when you walk barefoot on a railroad track, and for a long time before you see it, you can feel the train coming right up through your bones, through the bottoms of your feet. Her humming started slow and easy at first, but then, just like you would feel that train shake-a-shakin' from somewhere far off, after a while Miss Thomas's humming made you feel like something big and strong was passing right by you, and everything on you was getting rattly and shaky and about to get shook loose. It made you want to drop your fork and grab hold to something solid. From hearing just this little bit of humming, I could understand why Mr. Jimmy didn't call her a singer. Singer wasn't a big enough word to take in the kind of music that was jumping out of Miss Thomas's chest, and I didn't notice before how funny Mr. Jimmy was. The stories he was telling about traveling around the country with Hermione Calloway had us all laughing so much that even the nosy people at all the tables near ours quit eating and were busting their guts and throwing their 2 cents into the stories. The only table that was quiet was where the dusky devastators were sitting. It seemed like Hermione Calloway could make it so you just wanted to sit and watch your hands and look sad on your face, with a sad look on your face. And I hadn't noticed before how nice Steady Eddie was either. He talked out of the side of his mouth and kept his eyes kind of blinked halfway down, especially when Miss Tyla would come to our table to see if we were all right, which she did a lot. And he was the first person I'd ever seen who could eat and talk and laugh and drink and sneeze whilst keeping a toothpick dangling out of his mouth. No matter what he'd do, that toothpick always stayed dancing just below his mustache, and Steady Eddie took his time to show me how to hold my lips and how to put my fingers like I was really playing a pretend saxophone. I'm not sure exactly when it happened, if it was when I was scraping up the last little drops of melted whipped cream, or if it was when Miss Thomas's fingers all got to flinging all that magic fairy dust. But sometime, whilst I was sitting in the sweet pea, another seed got to sprouting. Sometime in that smells like heaven place, another mighty maple started digging down its roots and grabbing hold. We're going to revisit this in a second, scholars. 1 second, I was laughing my head off, and the next second, I was feeling very surprised, 'cause something hit me, just as hard as Snaggletooth McNevin had smacked Hermione Calloway. All of a sudden, I knew that of all the places in the world that I'd ever been in, this was the one. That of all the people I'd ever met, these were the ones. This was where I was supposed to be. Scholars, I would like to go back to our quiz. In our quiz, our first question on this cycle says, what was the first mighty maple in chapter 9? I want you to think back. What was that first mighty maple? The thing that made him go across the state of Michigan. What was that idea? And then, just now he said there was another mighty maple. What is that new mighty maple? We just said it. If you need to look back, look back. And I want you to put that here. So this extended metaphor, this whole mighty maple growing, digging in its roots, he's saying that this is just a little bit of a seed. It's a new one. He knows it's going to become big. It's going to have a huge influence on him. So look back at what we just read. What is that new mighty maple? Put it here. We are going to go back to our book to finish up this chapter. And Hermione Calloway could kiss my wrist if he thought he was going to scare me out of this. It was going to take more than a grouchy old bald-headed guy with a tremendous belly to run me out of here. I was smiling and laughing and busting my gut so much that I got carried away, and some rusty old valve squeaked open in me then. Whoop zoop sloop. Tears started jumping out of my eyes so hard that I had to cover my face with the big red and white napkin that was on the table. Scholars, I want you to think back. Does Bud cry? No. Back on chapter 1, he said that his eyes didn't cry no more. Like, he still felt sad, but crying wasn't possible for him. And now this rusty old valve has opened and he's crying. What might this mean? I hadn't been this embarrassed since I woke up and found Mrs. Sleet looking at my legs. I could tell that everyone in the sweet pea had stopped laughing and talking and had started looking at me. But I still couldn't quit bawling. Mama used to tell me I'd only get one chance to make a first impression, and it looked like I was blowing it with the dusky devastators of the Depression. Shucks! Finally, I had to put my face in my arms on top of the table and put the napkin over my head. like it was a little blanket, 'cause try as hard as I wanted, it didn't look like I was gonna get this doggone valve closed anytime soon. I felt Miss Thomas's hand come up under the napkin and rub real soft and slow back and forth over my head. She pulled me out of my chair and into her lap and wrapped her arms around me and bounced me up and down on her knee. Dang gee, had I'd never have any kind of reputation with the band now. The only thing I could do was hang on to the napkin and try to make it so folks wouldn't notice how wet my face was. She said, so quiet that I was the only one who could hear it, "Okay, baby, okay. I know, sweetheart, I know." Then she started humming again, and with my ear mashed up against her chest, it felt like all my bones and muscles quit doing their jobs. It felt like something as big as a steam locomotive engine was chugging right past my ear. I wasn't sure if it was her lips or her hand, but something whispered to me in a language that I didn't have any trouble understanding. It said, "Go ahead and cry, bud. You're home." Now that we're done with chapter 14, we can finish up this quiz. Our last question in this cycle is, has Bud found what he was looking for in Grand Rapids? Think back, what was he looking for? Like, we know he was looking for his dad, but deeper than that, what was he trying to find in his life? And do you think he found it? Explain it. If you can put a direct quote, it's a bonus. When you are done with this cycle, click next and you will take your exit ticket. And then you're done with ELA.